Feel the rhythm! Feel the rhyme! Get on up! It's bobsled time! Cool run-ins! That is by far the best bit in the movie when they, just as they're starting off the run. But anyway, Cool Runnings. It's a film I've seen about 4 or 5 times now. And it's kind of a weird kind of film in a way, because, I think pretty much everyone would agree it's never going to appear on any greatest films of all time list. It's not The Godfather or Pulp Fiction or The Good, the Bad and the Ugly or anything like that. It's way too stupid and silly and campy and ridiculous a film for that. But at the same time, how can you not love it? How can you not love every single thing about this film? It's the brilliant kind of stupid comedy they just do. Would not like the idea as a basic concept of something based on a true story being a comedy. I think that's kind of almost disrespectful to the actual true story, but at the same time, this isn't really a true story. This is just... Actually, I think this is a good opportunity actually to cover an issue about films based on true stories. They're not based on true stories, they're inspired by true stories. For the most part. This film is almost entirely fictional. The only thing that is actually true in this film is that Jamaica had a bobsleigh team that went to the 1988 Winter Olympics. Other than that, it's completely fictional, and that's fine. I'm not someone who thinks that, because you're going to make a film based on a true story, it therefore has to be the true story. No, it's been inspired by the true story of the Jamaican bobsleigh team, and they're going to write a film around that idea. But it is completely a work of fiction, and therefore I think it's probably okay that it should be a comedy. I don't know whether Jamaicans might be offended by the Jamaican stereotype in it or something like that. The actual Jamaican bobsleigh team that went to the Winter Olympics, they weren't particularly good, so I think the way that they perform, this is actually maybe a bit more respectful to the Jamaican bobsleigh team's actual performance. Actually, I think in the film they actually do a little bit better than they did in reality. But anyway, this film kind of has sort of 5 main characters, being the 4 members of the bobsleigh team and obviously the coach, played by John Candy. It was his last ever film before he died, actually. Just talk about them. I can't remember any of their names, unfortunately. I can't even remember John Candy's character's name, actually. So I'm just going to have to sort of refer to them as... you've got the main sprinter, the guy who ends up driving. You've got the go-kart driver, the guy with the dreadlocks. You've got Baldy, as he's called quite a lot in the film, the sort of big, tough guy. And then you've got the little sort of wimp, Junior, I think actually he was called. I remember his name. Who has a bit of conflict with his father. So you've kind of got sort of 4 stories going on at once, which for a film that's only an hour and a half, that's quite a lot going on, really. Perhaps there's too many subplots in here. That's one major fault I can see with this film. You start out with the main sprinter, who's obviously trying to get to the Olympics as a sprinter, and you've got his friend who's a go-kart driver. He goes off and tries to qualify for the Olympics, but this guy who ends up being on the bobsleigh team trips him up, and he trips up another guy who ends up being the other guy on the bobsleigh team. I guess it's kind of maybe this sort of element of forgiveness that you see initially in the film, which is that of... he stopped him from getting the Olympics, but he's kind of okay with that. He's going to let him join the bobsleigh team. But the bald guy isn't so forgiving, and he kind of wants to get at him, but at the same time, this kind of dilemma he's faced with, that if he doesn't let him go on the team, he can't go to the Olympics. Now, the bald guy, he kind of goes through a little bit of a development and sort of rehabilitation during the film, in that he starts out as this kind of selfish guy who just wants to go to the Olympics for the sake of going to the Olympics, and by the end he's maybe a bit more sort of open, a bit nicer a guy, and he kind of develops a little bit of a friendship with Junior. Only touched on very briefly. They kind of just sort of dip into it from time to time, and each time you go in, it's kind of developed a little bit off camera, sort of, and we're just sort of seeing the results of that. So that's maybe a little sketchy, that subplot. The other kind of thing that kind of bugs me is the go-kart driver ultimately ends up being the brakeman on the back. They say quite early on in this film that a bobsleigh team consists of 3 sprinters and a driver, and that's basically what we have at the start. We have the 3 sprinters who obviously couldn't get to the Olympics as sprinters, and then you have a go-kart driver. So it seemed logical that the go-kart driver should be the driver of the bobsleigh, but he's not in the end. He's the brakeman, and in the end, one of the sprinters ends up being the brakeman. I don't quite understand that. Why is the go-kart driver on the team if he's not going to drive? Is that because there's nobody else, I guess? And also John Candy's character, the coach, who previously cheated. I guess he doesn't really go through any kind of sort of rehabilitation or anything, but there's kind of an interesting idea sort of partway through the film that is, don't let the team I'm coaching here suffer because of me. You know, let me suffer for what I did wrong. But again, it's kind of only sort of touched on very briefly, and we kind of just sort of dip into it from time to time. Again, it's a subplot we could have done without, really. I would have preferred, not to have these subplots, particularly in an hour-and-a-half film. There's maybe a couple of major flaws that this film has. But the comedy is enough to keep this going. Maybe also the basic idea that this team, I don't know how true this is to reality, it's probably not true at all, but they only make the decision to even start forming a bobsleigh team to compete at the Winter Olympics 3 months before the Olympics take place. I find it very hard to believe that they would have been able to put the team together, get a coach, having never been in a bobsleigh before, to have mastered the techniques of running it down a ramp, getting in and driving it around. I find it very hard to believe all that could have happened in 3 months and they would have been fit to actually compete at the Olympics. But again, it's a film. You kind of have to have a little bit of suspension of disbelief from that kind of idea. It's not so much the point that they're able to compete at any kind of high level, it's the fact that they're there at all, really. And that actually becomes a little bit of a problem, I think, in the final act of the film. Maybe not even the final act, maybe the second half of the final act, which is once they're at the Olympics and competing. Certainly, I remember in reality, that was basically the job done. It was just remarkable that they were even there in the first place. In the film, it's kind of portrayed almost as if they have a chance of winning a medal, which was never a possibility in reality. And after all the stuff they've been through, people laughing at them, oh, you don't belong here, kind of stuff, I kind of find it hard to believe that they would actually have had a chance of winning a medal. But they have to kind of create that as a possibility to actually give us some kind of conflict and something to actually make the ending tense or gripping in some kind of way. So, again, it's kind of, I think that in that case it was kind of a necessary plot point to create this possibility of them winning a medal, which ultimately they don't do in the film either. I guess maybe they kind of thought that would be overkill to actually have them win a medal in the film, since that's not what happened in reality. And actually, the footage of the crash at the end of the film, the footage of that is the actual crash from the actual Jamaican bobsleigh team, oddly enough, which actually looks a lot more painful than the crash you see in the film, oddly enough. I guess they didn't want the actors to go through the same things that the real bobsleigh team went through. But I don't think they really carried their bobsled over the finish line and got applauded by everyone. That's very much Hollywood there. But it's the good kind of drama. I kind of like that. Interesting ideas of friendship that develop throughout this film that are all really sort of focused on in kind of subplots, really, which we could have done without, especially considering this film's only 90 minutes or something around that time. But the comedy and just the basic sort of shenanigans going on in this film, it's enough to keep you entertained throughout, and it's enough, certainly for me, to want to watch this film over and over and over, because every time I just can't help but smile when I'm watching this film. This is kind of sort of in its own category. In terms of it being an enjoyable film, it's a 10 out of 10. In terms of it being one of the greatest films of all time, it's a 0 out of 10. If that makes any sense at all. So I guess overall, maybe I suppose I would have to say it's a 5 out of 10. But that's not to say I don't highly recommend it. So maybe it's pointless me rating this film at all. I'm just going to say, see this film if you haven't already. Okay. Well, I will see you for another review some other time, guys.